Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs, et bienvenue à la Conseil municipal pour la ville d'Ottawa pour le 12.
Welcome to the City Council meeting.
The 12th of December, 2018. For those who are able to, could you please rise for a moment of personal reflection and remain standing as we introduce our special guest who will sing the national anthem. If you could remain standing, we'll ask our colleague Mathieu Fleury to introduce our very special guest who is going to sing the national anthem for us today. Conseiller, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le maire. Bonjour à tous.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. I'm very pleased to introduce Laurent Gagnon.
Vocal and piano teacher at Sing House Studios. Laura has toured extensively across Canada as a solo performer and internationally with the critically acclaimed McCartney Years Tribute Band. She has also worked with some of the biggest names in the music industry, such as the vocal coach Elaine Overholt, also Ray Charles, Tina Turner, and Dionne Warwick, and platinum-selling songwriter and producer Chad Urshik, also known within the Inception soundtrack. She has won awards for her work in the Ontario music scene by creating an all-female musician network and a showcase called The Dollhouse. Laura has been featured in multiple magazines and has gained international radio airplay in both North America and Europe. Laura, the floor is yours.
Oh, Canada, terre de nos aïeux, tant franc laissé défiler en glorieux, qu'elle ton bras sait porter le pays, il sait porter la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits. God keep our lands glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Laura, for that rousing rendition of our national anthem. Great way to start our meeting off today. It's now my honor to invite Mr. Ali Tejpar to the podium for this Council's City Builder Award. Ali, welcome, and I'll invite your City Councillor, Mathieu Fleury, to join. Bienvenue, Monsieur le Conseiller Fleury, and extend a warm welcome to family and friends who are here to celebrate with you. Ali is being honored for his outstanding leadership, volunteerism, and service to the community. He is recognized for promoting meaningful dialogue while embracing diversity and pluralism, and for his contributions to empowering and supporting youth. With his passion for civic engagement and his amazing volunteer skills, Ali was a recent recipient of the United Way Community Builder Award. In addition to his academic commitments for a Juris Doctor Master of Arts dual degree at Ottawa U and Carleton, he still finds time to volunteer and work for many important local causes. Ali serves the community as a volunteer with the Ottawa Global Shapers Hub of the World Economic Forum, the Ishmaeli Council for Ottawa, and with Youth Ottawa's Ottawa Youth Engagement Committee, OYEC. He is one of the youngest directors of the board of the Royal Commonwealth Society of Ottawa, and he is a member of the University of Ottawa Faculty Council. As a portfolio lead with the Economic Planning Board of the Ismaili Council for Ottawa, Ali coordinated pro bono workshops for immigrants and newcomers on financial literacy, entrepreneurship, networking, and leadership. Along with other leaders on Youth Ottawa's OYAC, Ali provided crucial youth input in meetings with City Council members and civic leaders on a wide variety of issues. I want to personally thank Ali for being instrumental in developing the application process, marketing and launch of Ottawa's first Mayor for a Day in 2018, which we'll repeat in 2019. And we picked a great day. They got to meet the Prime Minister at Invest Ottawa. They got to ride on the train and a couple of other things. So it was quite an exciting day for them, and hopefully we'll get lots of applications again for 2019. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you, Ali, for your tremendous contributions. For a young person, you've really embraced volunteerism and the responsibility to give back to one's community. And on behalf of all my colleagues on City Council, it's my pleasure to present you with the Mayor's City Builder Award with your Councillor, Mathieu Fleury. Congratulations. Well done. Congratulations. Come on out here. We'll just get a picture.
Thank you to Mayor Watson and Councillor Fleury for presenting me with this award. It is an absolute honor to be named the Mayor's City Builder for my community impact work here in Ottawa. Very briefly, this award is as much mine as it is the incredible community leaders with whom I work alongside. This includes Emma Buchanan, Ian Bingaman, Diana Knight, and Patrick Champagne with the Ottawa Youth Engagement Committee, Leora Raplat and Carrie Eusebio with the Ottawa Global Shapers Hub, Karim Kirani, Bashir Sarani, and Zara Jadadi with the Ismaili Council for Ottawa, Dean Adam Dodek and David Danielson with the University of Ottawa Faculty Council, and Gregory Evanick and Basil Crozier with the Royal Commonwealth Society of Ottawa. Lastly, I want to thank my friends, family, and mentors, and most importantly, my partner Jade, who is my constant source of strength and encouragement. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Well, congratulations again, Ali. Thank you for the great work you do in the community. Madam Deputy Clerk, roll call, please. Appel nominal.
Councillor Luloff.
Present.
Councillor Dudas.
Present.
Councillor Harder. Here. Councillor Suds. Here. Councillor El Shantiri.
Present.
Councillor Gower.
EC.
Councillor Kavanaugh. Present. Councillor Shirley.
Here.
Councillor Eglai.
Here.
Councillor Deans.
Here.
Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Councillor Fleury.
Ici.
Councillor Nussbaum.
Here.
Councillor McKenney.
Present.
Councillor Leeper.
Present.
Councillor Brockington.
Here.
Councillor Menard.
Here.
Councillor Cloutier.
Present.
Councillor Blais.
Present.
Councillor Derouse.
Here.
Councillor Moffat.
Here.
Councillor Meehan.
Here.
Councillor Hubley.
Here.
Mayor Watson.
See?
Le quorum est tient, Monsieur le Maire.
See?
You had the quorum?
Both confirmation of the 5th of December 2018. Carried. Declarations of interest, including those originally rising from prior meetings. Déclaration de conflit d'intérêt. None? Regrets? No regrets filed to date. Motion to introduce reports. Motion portant présentation de rapport. Conseiller Blais, appuyé par Conseiller Nussbaum.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire, que le rapport du comité.
That nominating committee report 1, the report from the Corporate Services Department entitled Proposed 2019 Budget Direction, Timeline and Consultation Process, and the report from the City Clerk and Solicitor entitled Summary of Oral and Written Public Submissions for items subject to the Planning Act explanation requirements at the City Council meeting of November 28, 2018, be received and considered.
Reports. Nominating Committee Report number 1, rapport numéro 1 du Comité des candidatures. Item 1, appointment of Sports Commissioner and Council Liaison positions for the term of Council. Nomination de commissaires au sport et des agents de liaison du Conseil, mandat du Conseil 2018 à 2022. The motion? Carried. Item number 2, appointment to standing committees, transit commission and subcommittees 2018-2022 term of council. Nomination au comité permanent à la commission de transport en commune et au sous-comité mandat de conseil 2018 à 2022. I have a technical amendment moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Harder. Basically says, whereas at its meeting of December 11th, the nominating committee considered a motion from Mayor Watson to recommend the appointment of members. Whereas the Mayor's intention to include Stephen Blais in the list of those members recommended for appointment of the Planning Committee, and whereas the motion was being finalized by the Clerk's Office in advance of the Nominating Committee meeting, Councillor Blais' name was inadvertently omitted. Therefore, we resolve that Council approve the additional appointment of Councillor Stephen Blais to the Planning Committee 2018-2022. So I think it was just a transmission issue that didn't get it. So, Mayor, I have a motion as well. Okay, I don't have a copy. Oh, I'm getting it right now. So do you want to introduce your motion?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Are we going to take the opportunity to address it now or through debate? I can just put it on the floor. Whereas the nominating committee has recommended in the appointments to standing committees, transit commission, and subcommittees report that 8 councillors named in the report compose the planning committee for the 2018-2022 term of council. Clear that will need to be amended. Whereas only 2 of the 9 recommended members represent wards inside Ottawa's Greenbelt, and whereas the planning committee's terms of reference include decisions on planning matters that are of importance across the city, and it is desirable that the committee be composed to the extent possible of councillors representing the rural, suburban, and urban areas. And whereas both Councillors Brockington and Menard indicated first-choice interest in serving on the Planning Committee, therefore be it resolved that Council amend the report's recommendations to include Councillors Brockington and Menard as members of the Planning Committee for the 2018-2022 term of Council. Councillor McKenney will be seconding this one.
Okay, thank you. And then other motions for this section 2? No. Okay, so we have the motion by myself and Councillor Harder with respect to Councillor Blais. Carried. The Leeper-McKenney motion, I would urge members not to support this. I think what we've tried to do is find a balance with the committees, and if we start cherry-picking one section, obviously it's not going to be particularly helpful. So I'll call yeas and nays on the Leeper-McKenney motion. Oh, I'm sorry, I asked and no one put their, I don't see the numbers up. Okay, I don't see anyone's name. Is the system not working?
I'm trying to hit the button, thanks.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor McKenney.
Sorry, so I wanted to speak to the entire recommendation. Is that okay? Thank you.
This is I'm to speak to any of the amendments and item 2.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I did want to take the opportunity, of course, to congratulate all of the new chairs and folks who are being recommended here to council. It's a big job, and I think that taking it on is quite commendable. So I do want to start by offering that. However, the taken collectively, the appointments to the standing committees, transit commission, subcommittees, and how that will manifest itself as the Finance and Economic Development Committee. I do take issue with. It does not represent in any way the diversity of the city. It's certainly, we've got only 3 women on the committee, and we've got only 3 councillors within the Greenbelt, and actually no councillors from urban downtown wards, the 5 downtown wards. And we know that we can all show up at FEDCO, and we can all ask questions, and we all get a vote here at council when it finally rises up. But We do know that FEDCO is where direction is set on many of the major projects and issues in the city that affect residents across the city. We do know that direction is set and decisions are made often at Chair's Committee, which is not open to the public. I see this as less about representation and more about power. And the thing we know about power is that, unlike, influence or it gets you what you want, gets stuff done. There's no doubt about that. But it doesn't last. It doesn't ensure that we have an equitable city. It doesn't ensure that everyone's needs are being considered. It doesn't mean that, we are building the type of affordable, sustainable, healthy city that we need for everyone. The downtown, is in any city, not just in Ottawa, is the heart of the city. And you need to have a healthy downtown. You need to have a healthy urban core for the entire city to function well. And what I see here in front of me doesn't give me the confidence that that diversity of voices is going to be heard, and that diversity of voices is going to be at the table when decisions are being made on very major and impactful decisions and projects moving forward. So, I always vote with my conscience. I always try to consider what I'm doing for the residents who elected me. I take that very seriously. There's no way that I could defend not having, more than 3 councillors inside the Greenbelt, 3 inside the whole Greenbelt. Not one voice from Rideau Rockcliffe, not one voice from Rideau Vanier, not one voice from Somerset Ward, Kitchissippi, or Capital Ward. So it's, and I just think that without the voices from across the city, we are not doing the best that we can. This is, again, we need to ensure that all parts of the city are represented. I hope and I trust that I would do the same thing if there wasn't one rural voice on this committee, and I hope and trust that I would do the same thing if there wasn't one East End voice on this committee. So I would, I would like to see this go back to nominating committee. I like to see more thought being put into who's sitting on all of the committees and who's represented at FEDCO, so that we are serious about the type of city that we want to live in and that we want to leave behind and that we want to make an affordable, equitable, healthy, sustainable city for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Leeper, please, on both your motion and the main report.
Thank you, Mayor. With respect to adding Councillors Menard and Brockington to the Planning Committee, it's critical that we have those urban voices, and not just mine on Planning Committee. The volume of applications that are reshaping our downtown year by year right now is extraordinary. And we need to have councillors on that Planning Committee beside myself who understand the tensions that creates as we try to create a sustainable city. And in its current makeup, I don't see that balance is there. I believe that by adding Councillors Brockington and Menard, we can only improve the quality of work that Planning Committee does, and without necessarily increasing any amount of discord. I think it's only positive to have more voices at that table. With respect to the overall report, Mr. Mayor, it is difficult to see how I can support this when its most powerful committee, the committee committee that has the most influence on the agenda of this city contains no urban representation and very few councillors who are even inside of the Greenbelt. When I take a look at the terms of reference of FEDCO, which is really the de facto, Mr. Mayor, it is your de facto cabinet. It is the executive committee of this city council. And when I take a look at its responsibilities, it is broad-reaching. The fundamental work of overseeing and developing the city's annual operating and capital budgets. The responsibility to review and make recommendations to council on all matters associated with the city's long-range financial plan, fiscal framework, and the overall establishment and implementation of corporate financial management and sustainability principles. These are critical to the functioning of our city, to the city that we want to be, and it's critical that the aspirations and the hopes of residents in our rural and suburban and urban areas are well represented on it. Not to mention greater gender diversity as well. We have just 3 women on FEDCO, and that is not acceptable in this day and age. I believe, Mr. Mayor, that I would challenge you to come back to us with a more diverse nomination for FEDCO, but lacking that, I'm not going to be able to support it when it doesn't reflect the aspirations and the values of our entire city. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor El-Shantiri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I was going to speak about this item, but I felt the need to talk about this. The amalgamation's been on for 18 years, almost 19 now, and we're still talking about the makeup of the city. I think we all know we're all elected to city council to represent our community. So I find it ironically, we hear it after 19 years, we should still think about rural, suburban, and urban. We are elected to serve our residents in the city of Ottawa, and I hope our focus will be around that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Menard, please. Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. Quick question on Councillor Leeper's motion. I just want to clarify, this motion is not removing anybody from the committee that's already been appointed to that committee. Is that correct? And a question to staff. Does this motion fit within the current parameters in terms of the number of people that are allowed on this committee? Would it fit within that range?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so I guess I would just say to my honorable colleagues around the table, I've put this as my #1 choice, and I'm not here to advocate for myself. I'm here to advocate on behalf of residents in my community who are dealing with infill issues on a regular basis. We're one of the most popular wards for those sorts of issues, and so I would urge you to. You're not taking anybody off this committee. All you're doing is adding a voice who deals with these issues in his area a heck of a lot. So I would please urge you to support this motion. The committee makeup of who's already on there will not change, and it's within the parameters of the number of people that can be on the committee. So please urge you to support this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Nussbaum, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and let me join others in congratulating all colleagues on their appointments. I think there's no question that all colleagues around this table are capable of undertaking the important work in front of us, and I have full confidence that councillors will take into account both their ward and their broader city responsibilities. That being said, we do have in our system a ward-based councillor system. We don't have councillors at large. And I think part of the rationale for that is an assumption that ward councillors, while absolutely representing the broader interests of our city, can also bring a particular lens from their part of that city. So they can offer ideas, suggestions, thoughts, feedbacks on how city business reflects and impacts on their residents. And so to Councillor Leeper's motion, and having sat on Planning Committee this past term of council, I can say I really benefited from having different voices around that table. And we didn't always agree, but it was always a respectful discussion. We had good numbers of rural, suburban, urban-based councillors, and it was great. We deliberated on files. Democracy ruled at the end of the day, but it was important to have those voices around that table. And similarly, so if you look at Councillor Leeper's motion, the idea of adding 2 of our colleagues who specifically requested to be on Planning Committee as their #1 choice, I think the least we can do is honor that without disrupting the flow and the work of that committee. There are going to be really important files taking place there this term of council. The renewal of the official plan obviously is going to be a critical piece. I think we would only benefit by having those additional voices on that committee. Again, I think some of what my colleagues have said already about general representation is true. I haven't heard anyone at this stage suggest taking anyone off a committee. It really is trying to find balance within a committee that is an important workhorse of council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Does anyone else wish to speak to the motion of the item? So I'll just offer a comment. I think it's important to remember that every single committee warmly welcomes members of council who are not on that committee. That's standard fare. Everyone, if you have an item that's at Planning Committee or at FEDCO or CPS and you're not on that committee, chances are that you will show up and give your point of view, and there's no hierarchy that, the committee members get to speak first and you're left at the sidelines. And then secondly, virtually every decision, with some exceptions, actually rises to council where we make the final decision. So I would urge members to vote against the Leeper-McKenney motion, and yeas and nays have been called.
Conseil Blais?
No.
Councillor Deroux?
No.
Councillor Leeper?
Yes.
Councillor Hubley?
Oh.
Councillor Moffat?
No.
Conseil Fleury?
Oui.
Councillor McKenney?
Yes.
Councillor Nussbaum?
Yes.
Councillor Dudas?
No.
Councillor Luloff?
No.
Councillor Gower?
No.
Councillor Meehan?
No.
Councillor Tierney?
No.
Councillor Deans?
Yes.
Councillor Kavanagh?
Yes.
Councillor El Shantiri?
No.
Councillor Suds?
No.
Councillor Menard?
Yes.
Councillor Shirelli?
Yes.
Councillor Harder?
No.
Conseil Cloutier?
No.
Councillor Brockington?
Yes.
Councillor Eglai? Mayor Watson?
No.
9 yeas, 15 nays.
Okay, so on the item #2 as amended. Carried.
Oh, sorry, dissent.
Dissent by...
Big dissent.
Is it the same people that you're dissenting on the whole report, item 2? Okay, so the same people that voted will be listed as dissenting. Item #3 is appointments to boards, 2018-2022 term of council, nomination conseil, mandat de conseil 2018 à 2022. So we have before us, does anyone have any questions or comments on item #3? No? So on item #3, carried as presented. Item #4, appointments to external agencies 2018 to 2022, term of council, nomination or organisme externe, mandats conseil 2018-2022. These are all the AMO and AFMO and CCOC and FCA and Roma. Does anyone have a question or comment? Carried. Item #5 is appointment of selection panels for boards, advisory committees, and committee of adjustment, 2018-2022 term of council, nomination comité de sélection. Councillor Moffat has a motion signed by Councillor El Shantiri with respect to the Planning Advisory Committee. Councillor Moffat, if you'd like to introduce this, please.
Thank you. I won't go into the whole thing. It's just plainly the Planning Advisory Committee was struck last term, toward the end of last term, with Councillor Harder, Councillor Nussbaum, and myself, sitting as the representatives, the council representatives. We helped appoint the members. It's something I'm interested in. It's something I'd like to move forward with. I spoke with Councillor El Shantiri, who has been named the chair of the Agricultural Affairs Committee, who would, by virtue of our governance, sit on that. We've agreed that he would be all right with me carrying on the planning committee and the planning advisory committee as a representative for AIRAC. So this motion sets that forward. So it says, therefore, be it resolved, with three-quarters of members present and voting, approve the appointment of Councillor Scott Moffat to the planning advisory committee as the representative of AIRAC.
It's a very controversial issue.
Likely it is. I imagine a lot of people were scrapping to be on the planning advisory committee.
Anyone have any questions or comments on Councillor Moffat's motion with the support of Councillor El Shantiri? Carried. On item 5 as amended? Carried. Item number 6 is the, do we have to, we're going right to number 6, yeah. Proposed 2019 budget direction, timeline, and consultation process. Calendrier de processus de consultation proposé pour le budget de 2019. So we have a presentation from staff, and I have some opening comments. Budgets have and will continue to be about setting priorities for our city and being prepared for what is to come. I'm proud to have delivered on our commitment to taxpayers over the last 2 terms, presenting budgets with tax increases limited to 2.5% or less for 8 years in a row. Je suis fier d'avoir respecté mes...
I'm very proud of respecting my commitment over the past 8 years
with residents, and that's why I put forward a tax target of between 2% and 3% in the last municipal election. Keeping your taxes low in the city affordable has been my #1 priority over the past 2 mandates. But there can, at times, be some uncertainty on both ends of that equation. And that's part of the challenges currently facing our city and, quite frankly, cities across the province. Until the new provincial government introduces its first budget in 2019, there is uncertainty as to how their fiscal decisions will affect the municipal budget. Also, the city expects to find out in 2019 how the province and the federal government will fund infrastructure programs in the future and how much funding we will receive to cover the costs of implementation and enforcement of legalizing cannabis. We must acknowledge these pressures and approach the 2019 budget as one of transition. But this flexibility also presents the opportunity to do more to address a priority I've heard across the city, and I'm sure many of you have as well in your own wards. So I made my way to more than 10,000 doors to hear from residents over the last year. The condition of our roads has come up as a priority in many communities. La condition de nos routes et de notre...
The state of our roads and infrastructure is a priority for several communities.
The 90 freeze-thaw cycles we experienced over the last 2 winters, and we can't deny the impact it's had on the condition of our roads, pathways, and sidewalks. This is why I'm proposing a tax goal for 2019 that will help us invest an additional $9.8 million towards infrastructure renewal projects, including roads, sidewalks, paths, culverts, and bridges in all parts of the city, on top of our base funding. I've heard from residents, and I believe they're prepared to contribute that little bit more in order to have better infrastructure in their own communities. At this rate of investment, the existing infrastructure funding gap that we all know about could be fully addressed within 5 years instead of the projected 10 years, while adding no new debt to tackle this challenge. À ce rythme d'investissement, nous pourrions...
So at this speed, we will be able to eliminate the infrastructure deficit in 5 years.
3.5%, a difference that represents an additional $4 on the average property tax bill. This 1% transit levy increase is proposed to make up for the suggested 6-month freeze on transit fares, which Council supported, which we are offering to transit riders while we work towards the launch of the Confederation line of LRT next year. It will also allow OC Transpo to enhance bus services for users where warranted. And we've heard from many communities, not just growth communities, but many communities about the challenges of OC Transpo in their neighborhoods. As you know, fares and the transit levy are the only 2 sources of revenue over which Council has control to fund the operation of OC Transpo. Finally, in another high priority area, the budget that we're proposing to Council will include for the Ottawa Police a 3% base funding increase, plus 1.5% in assessment growth funding, in addition to guns and gangs funding for the provincial and federal governments. As a reminder, from 2014 to 2018, property taxpayers provided OPS with an average annual increase of 3.29%, above the rate of inflation, to support the important work of our men and women in uniform. That amounts to more than 13% over 4 years. This is in addition to the 4-year increase of 19.8% the taxpayers provided to the Ottawa Police Service from 2010 to 2014, again well above the rate of inflation. And this doesn't include the millions we anticipate in the months ahead that Premier Ford spoke to me about on Monday. Since Toronto is receiving $25 million for their guns and gangs challenges, our share would be in the range of $8 to $9 million, which represents an additional 3% increase to the OPS budget. So add it all up for the police, they'll get the 3%, they'll get 1.5% in assessment growth, plus they'll get 3% from the provincial government, for a total of 7.5% increase in their budget, or $20 to $21 million, which would make it the largest increase in the city's history of providing that kind of an increase to the police department. And this does not even include the federal provincial money, which still awaits a final agreement between the federal government and the provincial government, and a good portion of that money will flow to frontline police services like Ottawa. So these investments, as I mentioned, will lead to the largest increase ever to the police budget in the city's history, and this is warranted because of all of the challenges that we and many other cities, big cities, are facing when it comes to violence involving guns and gangs. That said, rest assured that I'll continue challenging city staff, as I know you will, to sharpen their pencils at every turn. Our goal will continue to be to bring in a budget with the lowest possible tax increase for residents year after year, but at the same time providing the basic and good services that we do provide to our families. Just like families across Ottawa have to tighten their belt, I'm sure the public expects the city to do the same. Just last week, for instance, I saw a report that the average Canadian household will spend an additional $400 next year on groceries due to everything from tariffs to wildfires in California. And we all have a role to play to keep Ottawa affordable. This is a reminder that we at the city need to be part of the solution to help families who are struggling with rising costs in many sectors, including gas, hydro, and food prices. Together, we'll continue tabling budgets with reasonable tax goals while delivering improvements to roads, sidewalks, and infrastructure projects in all our communities. Ces investissements nous aideront à améliorer l'état de nos routes.
Investment will help us improve our infrastructure.
Investments a priority for this term of council, so we can improve our community's transportation network for the benefit of all residents. I hope you join me in supporting the 3% tax goal for 2019 and enabling these critical investments to our city's roads, infrastructure, transit, and police services. Now we have a presentation by, is it the Treasurer, the Deputy Treasurer? And I think it'll be up on the screen. So over to you, please. Merci.
Got it? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On December 5th, 2018, Council approved a term of Council budget process as part of the 2018-2022 Council Governance Review. That report directed the City Treasurer to bring forward a report that details the budget timetable and provides budget directions in advance of each yearly budget. While the budget process is routinely delayed in an election year, the deadline for the issuance of final tax bills remains the same, requiring a final budget to be adopted by March. In this presentation, I will highlight the key elements that went into the recommendations in the report, provide an overview of the budget process between now and March, and the key dates to keep in mind. Dans cette présentation, je soulignerai les éléments.
I will tell you what are the main elements in this report and give you an overview of the budget process by March and key dates.
The tax and rate target increases were not developed in a vacuum. The financial impact of several economic, policy, legal, and regulatory factors were taken into consideration. L'impact financier de plusieurs facteurs économiques, politiques, juridiques et réglementaires a été pris en compte. Regulation changes such as the phasing in of the Canada Pension Plan benefits enhancement that will increase employer and employee contributions starting in 2019. Economic forecasts are also considered. For example, this year the construction price index has increased significantly to 6.2%. This inflation estimate is used to determine the increase to the contribution to capital. The long-range financial plans for transit, tax, and rate identified the funding requirements, reserve balances, and debt levels required to maintain assets in good repair over a 10-year period, and in the case of transit, for the next 30 years. The fiscal framework helps to guide the budget directions and set policies and targets for key budget items such as cost recovery targets for fees and debt levels. Nous avons également tenu compte des augmentations.
We also took into consideration the increase in salaries, the collective agreements,
To the upcoming provincial budget on municipalities. Therefore, it is recommended that 2019 be considered a transition budget, and the directions in the report would only apply to 2019. Once the provincial budget impacts are known, they can be factored into the 2020 budget directions for the remainder of the term. The 2019 budget directions also take into consideration motions from previous councils that would have a financial impact, such as the motion to reduce the time to address the infrastructure gap, and the motion to recommend a funding source for new crossing guards in the first quarter of 2019 until the budget is approved. The recommended 3% tax target is based on the analysis of the economic and policy factors described on the previous slide. Furthermore, each department reviewed the key operating and capital requirements to maintain services, looking for opportunities for operational efficiencies, impacts of growth on operations, changes in regulation, and any other operational service changes. Labor contract settlements were included in the overall cost pressures, and the overall compensation increases averaged 2%. Actuarial estimates of the cost of benefits were provided by external experts, and the average increase for benefits is 6% from a budget perspective. Des estimations actuarielles du coût des prestations ont été fournies par des experts externes et l'augmentation moyenne des prestations est de 6% pour le budget. There is an estimated $2.4 million pressure for the CPP benefit enhancement starting in 2019. The recommended 3% tax target also includes an allocation of $9.8 million towards the reducing the annual infrastructure funding shortfall and eliminate the infrastructure gap within the next 5 years without increasing debt. This tax target also considers continuing investment in long-term care, additional FTEs to maintain service levels such as paramedics, the cost of maintaining new infrastructure, and inflation on contracts and purchased materials and services. The Transit Long-Range Financial Plan recommended that transit taxes and transit fares increase at the same rate as transit operational costs. The estimated tax increase in the Long-Range Financial Plan is 2.5%. However, there are additional costs and risks to consider in 2019, since it is a transition year for transit services with the launch of the Confederation Line. Cost pressures include labor contract settlements, inflation on contracts and purchased materials and services, increases in fuel prices, and the continued investment in transit and expansion of services. Since the 2019 budget will only be approved in March and time is required to update fare tables and communications materials, the recommendation is to increase transit fares in July. The recommendation is to set the fare increase at 2.5% in accordance with the Transit Long-Range Financial Plan. This will mean no fare increases in the first 6 months of 2019 and does add an additional budget pressure that can be accommodated within the proposed 3.5% transit tax increase. Taking all these pressures into consideration, it is recommended that the transit tax increase by 3.5%, the difference being between a 3% and a 3.5% increase on the transit levy equates to $4 per year on the average tax bill. Based on preliminary impact information, staff estimate that assessment growth will be approximately 1.5%. Final analysis of the impact data will be completed in time to include a final forecast assessment growth increase amount in the draft budget tabled in February. Per the budget process approved by Council, the services governed by a board or commission will be allocated their individual prorated share of the 1.5% assessment growth. Conformément à la procédure budgétaire approuvée par le Conseil, les services régis par un conseil ou une commission se verront attribuer leur quote-part individuelle de la croissance de l'évaluation de 1,5%. There is a recommendation that user fees increase in accordance with the directions outlined in the fiscal framework or the long-range financial plans. The fiscal framework provides direction and targets for setting user fees. Services that do not benefit the community as a whole, where an individual chooses to use the service, should be charged on a cost recovery basis, thereby reducing the property tax requirement. User fees should be set with this direction in mind. The 2019 draft budget will be developed in accordance with the 2017 long-range financial plan for water, wastewater, and stormwater. The LRFP reflects the financial strategies and revenue increases required each year to maintain and operate this capital-intensive service. The recommended increases for water revenues is 4%, wastewater 5%, and stormwater 13%. These revenue increases must take into consideration not only the fixed and variable rates charged, but also the forecast water consumption and overall client-based growth estimates. The draft budget will include proposed rate increases for both the old rate structure and the new rate structure to support the transition from the old system to the new system in 2019. So this slide summarizes the total allocation of the tax and assessment growth funding. It does not include fees and other revenues. If approved, an assessment growth of 1.5% combined with a 3% tax increase and a 3.5% increase in transit taxes will generate an additional $73.36 million in tax revenues. After allocating a proportionate share to police, public health, library, transit, and the Office of the Auditor General, the remaining balance of $44.565 million is available to fund all other tax-supported services. $9.8 million would be used to increase investment in infrastructure renewal, and $34.765 million would be available for all other additional operating and capital requirements. The capital budget will be developed in accordance with the Council-approved Transportation Master Plan, Infrastructure Master Plan, 2014 and 2017 Development Charges Background Study, and the Long-Range Financial Plan. The City funds its capital program through a combination of cash reserves, development charges on growth projects, debt, and grants from senior levels of government. Today you are receiving the Budget Directions Report. If approved, it will help set the envelope for the draft operating and capital budget to be tabled at Council on February 6th. Between now and February, public consultations will take place, and on the next slide I will provide you with a list of resources available to support this process. Meetings will also be scheduled by the City Manager's Office with the Mayor, committee chairs, City Manager, and the Treasurer to discuss budget priorities for each of the committee's service areas. Councillors can also request a meeting with the Mayor and City Manager to discuss budget priorities specific to their ward. Once the draft budget is tabled in February, each committee, advisory committee, commission, and board will hold meetings to consider the 2019 draft budget and receive public delegations. The final budget and any proposed changes arising from the committees will be considered and adopted as Committee of the Whole on March 6th. Le budget final et toute proposition de modification émanant des comités seront examinées et adoptées en comité plénier le 6 mars. There are several resources available to councillors and the public throughout the public consultation process. Many of these resources are available on the City's website under the Budget section. There are educational videos, a schedule of public meetings, social media links, and additional information on the city budget, including past budgets. Il existe des vidéos éducatifs, un calendrier des réunions publiques, des liens vers les médias sociaux, des informations supplémentaires sur le budget de la ville, y compris les budgets antérieurs. The public will have multiple options for providing input and suggestions prior to the tabling of the draft budget. An online survey will be available on the city's website starting in January. They can also send an email to budget@ottawa.ca. They can contact their ward councillor or attend a public consultation session in their ward. This input will be collected and considered by management prior to budget tabling. If you have any questions related to this report or throughout the budget process, please feel free to contact myself, Isabel Jasmine, or Marion Sibulik. Thank you very much. Merci.
Well, thank you very much. I think for our new colleagues, you'll quickly realize we have one of the best treasurer, deputy treasurer, finance departments in any municipality in Ontario. And that was a very thorough and precise rundown of what's before us. So I have two motions on item number 6. Does anyone else have a motion I have Councillor Brockington and Blais and Councillor Menard and Kavanaugh with 2 motions. Does anyone else have a motion? No. So I think what we'll do is we'll go and ask the people who are moving motions to get them on the floor so everyone can see them on the screen. So Councillor Brockington, seconded by Councillor Blais. If you could introduce your motion, Councillor, I think this is a good idea.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good morning, everyone. I think this is technical in nature, but certainly open to debate and discussion. Simply item 2 on this recommendation with respect to the transit levy. The motion just proposes to strike the last words, quote, which will provide additional service in growth areas. I want to explain why. If you read the staff report on page 6, staff enumerate all the additional anticipated expenses that are forthcoming in the next year, include transition-related costs in addition to labor contract settlements, legislative changes to the Canada Pension Plan, estimated inflationary increases on contracts, purchase services, and significant impacts related to forecast increases in fuel pricing. Lots of good reasons why the levy should be increased, and basically I don't want to handcuff staff exclusively using the levy for additional service in growth areas. Yes, growth areas need additional service, and the transit levy will go towards that as well. But by clarifying the language in item 2, it really needs to go to as much high demands as possible, and we just leave that to the discretion of staff. So this does not take away money from the growth areas. This just gives staff more flexibility in how they can address that additional levy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next is Councillor Menard, seconded by Councillor Kavanaugh. I think there have been a couple versions of this, so if you have the one that's the most recent, we can put it up on the screen, Deputy Clerk.
And actually, Mr. Mayor, if you could, I did speak with staff, and it seems they have we've got agreement on a direction instead of a formal motion. So I could withdraw this and instead have direction to staff on the final.
Okay, but you have to write out the direction, though.
Yeah, it's the same as the final 2 points on the motion. That's written there.
Okay, well, we'll have to ask staff for their opinion on that. Okay, anyone else have a motion that we can let everyone know about and we can put on your screens? Est-ce qu'il y a des autres personnes qui avaient une motion pour cet rapport numéro 6? Nope. Okay, so speaking on both, well, right now we have just one motion, and the item which is on page 15, item 6, Councillor Leeper has the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. A friend of mine, I think it's Dave Hicks, tweeted out during the Amazon discussion, be the city that you told Amazon you are. I think it's a really succinct way of talking about the kinds of aspirations that the residents of Ottawa have. Companies want to do business. People want to live in cities. They want to work in cities that are sustainable, that address the safety of the community, that are vibrant, that are addressing climate change. And in order to do all those things, we need to invest as a city. We need to make, in order to have a safe city for everyone, we need to invest in housing. We need to invest in programs that address the most vulnerable in our community. We need to invest in transit that is affordable and reliable and a great option for those who want an option to an alternative to the car. We need to make real investments in the arts and culture in order to ensure that companies have a great city into which to attract the best talent in the world. And for all of those investments, it can't just be a bare minimum. It can't just be a sprinkling of funding to say that we are addressing it. We need to make real investments in each of those areas. I don't believe that a budget that sees an increase in the levy of 3% plus growth at 1.5, leaving us around $44.5 million in order to be able to deal with all the various different increased costs that come with growth in this city, is going to allow us to do that. you know, it's important that we make no mistake. We are either going to make those investments now and in a way that sees a real commitment to them, or we don't do it and we have to do it later, or we face the consequences. As we're seeing with the underfunding of our infrastructure for so many years, the increases that we have to make will hurt more later than if we're dealing with all these things that we need to invest in a sensible way, in a not arbitrary way through every single year of the term of council. In the last term of council, I remember I was sitting here 4 years ago, and we were at some pains with the clerk to ensure that we understood the budget process well. We were at great pains to ensure that by approving the budget directions report, that we weren't approving a cap on ourselves, that we weren't saying City Council has a hard cap on it of 2%. And yet, those of us who were looking for some sensible investments that went above the 2% in the last term of council were told that you agreed to a cap. We were told that we were going somehow against our word, that we had agreed to a 2% cap. And make no mistake, if we pass the budget direction today with 3%, and we choose to do a tax increase that is something different, we will be told again that we've gone back on our word. I absolutely believe that. No matter what the process looks like, if we as a council choose to do something other than a 3% tax increase, we'll be told that we're going back on our promise. I made no promise in the most recent election about what the increase in taxes would be. My promise to residents was that I was going to take a look every year at what kinds of investments that we need to make in order to build the city that residents aspire to. What kinds of investments do we need to make every year in order to try to build the city that we told Amazon we are? Mr. Mayor, I would ask that you have a separate yeas and nays votes for item number 1. I cannot support a tax cap at number 3 because I know how that's going to be presented, or a tax cap at 3%, because I know how that's going to be presented back at us if we choose to make meaningful investments in the areas that we need to in order to build a sustainable, a safe, a caring, a vibrant city. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So just for clarification, you want a separate vote on item number 1 of item 6 here. Is that right?
Sorry. Oh, sorry. It's item number 2. Where's the 3% cap?
It's 1.
Yeah, sorry. It is number 1, exactly.
So
in the
are
report
you proposing a cap? Do you have an idea of all the things you want, what the total tax bill should be for?
No, Mr. Mayor, I think you've had the opportunity to go door to door right across the city and hear the budget that people want. Rather than committing to a cap, I think the best process would be to see, we know that you and the city manager create the budget every year. I'd like to see a budget put in front of us that doesn't adhere to an arbitrary cap, but that recommends the investments necessary in your view and in senior city staff's view in order to create the kind of city we want. So I will not be supporting a direction that has a number associated with it. I would much prefer that we see your recommended budget that doesn't contain that arbitrary number.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harder, please, on either the amendment or the main report.
This be on the main report. The amendment, are you referring to Councillor Brockington?
That's correct.
I'm going to speak to that as well.
Okay.
First of all, for Ms. Jasmine, when do you imagine we're going to have the PowerPoints available for presentation in our communities, put online, et cetera, to start the dialogue? Will that be early in January or mid-January? Any idea? Ms. Jasmine's mic, please.
Can we get the microphone on, please, for Ms. Jasmine?
The presentations could be ready very shortly. So if you just provide those schedules in terms of when you plan to go out, we'll try to accommodate it as much as we can.
Sure. Well, last year I didn't join with colleagues at the Nepean Sportsplex, for example. I did it online. I know Councillor Hubely's done that in the past as well. And then I do a few different things. Also, I was just wondering if we could have one tailor-made for businesses. So if we have a very large number of BIAs in the city, I think that would be really relevant to be able to go in with them and say this is how it pertains to business. Is that possible?
Yes, we can do that.
Okay. And on the issue of the amendment that's recommended by Councillor Brockington, Mr. Manconi, every year that I can remember for the last, I don't even know how many years, you have said to me, Councillor, I can't give you, without money for growth, I can't give you more bus routes. And I would say that that's not just my story, that's Canada's story, that's Stittsville's story, that is, but for growth, we're talking growth, okay, which is a lot different than stretching routes. So it's very important that you've always said, without money for growth, I can't give you any more routes. Is that why the wording is this way?
Mr. Mayor, the investment, which is about $5 million, gives you a bit of both. It's a two-part. It's the feedback that all of the councillors have given Mr. Scrimter on the post-LRT routes, the adjustments to that, and then so $2.5 million towards that, and then $2.5 million to address some growth issues, some route issues, and chronic issues system-wide. So it's a bit of both, and so the councillor is quite right that it's to do both of those things.
And I know this is not, operating is different than capital, but how much is it for a single bus nowadays?
A double-decker in our TIC is approaching $1 million fully fitted out. Yeah. But that's on the capital side. This is the operating side.
So exactly. But I think it's still important. I mean, we can. I had a commissioner of Parks and Rec at Nepean that always said, "I can build you any building that you want. I just won't be able to open the doors and run it for you." Right, so there is that dichotomy all the time. That was Bob Selford, probably some of you know him. And here's another question with regard to MPAC and the fact that we're going to be valuing on assessment growth about 1.5%. If we could have all of our growth, I know that MPAC is not the fastest process. I know that I hear that they're getting better at it. What would that real growth look like?
I think if you actually were able to have everything the minute it was occupied, you probably would be able to add probably another 0.5% onto this, but it is a process. It does take time. As you can see through our supplementary taxes every year, we raise another probably $20 million through supplementary taxation, and I suggest probably about half of that could be on the growth number. But just to, we are a little bit of having an advantage this year. Typically, we're coming to you, we're figuring out what the growth is in September. And it is kind of a guesstimate at that point in time. We actually have very good numbers at this point in time. 1.5 is what's showing on the rolls, but we now have to do further analysis because we are allowed some technical adjustments to try to squeeze a little more growth out of that. And that's what we'd be coming back to you with in February.
So Mr. Kanellakis, a question for you. How nimble are we in going into this budget so that we hear around the table, again, we talk about diversity, we talk about many, many things, we talk about the differences across our city. Do you see any opportunity to be nimble in some cases where, we talk about a priority for the city is X, and in, for example, say it's in Kitchissippi or something like that, and Councillor Leeper says, you know what, that would be better spent on something like this. Do you see the ability to be nimble on that?
Mr. Mayor, the strategy that was outlined was basically to give you a one-year budget with a direction from this term, because we're trying to see what happens with the provincial budget and a whole bunch of other things. We also haven't brought to you the strategic plan, which will reflect what we believe will be the priorities of this council for this term and beyond, based on your election campaign, based on the commitments that you've made and directions you've given to staff over the years that we still are committed to. You'll be seeing those priorities, those themes, and those directions and the projects related to those. That discussion will happen and commence immediately after this budget is passed on March 6th, and that will be your opportunity to have some nimbleness, because you're going to have to make some choices about where do you want to invest the incremental money that we get every year. And that's where the debate will happen at committees and at council with respect to where do you want staff to focus and implement for the remainder of the term and beyond.
Okay, so just another question, and sometime this year we're going to hit the 1 million people in the city of Ottawa mark, which is excellent. I mean, something to be proud of, but when that happens, I mean, 1 million people in Mississauga, 1 million people here are very different because of our geography. And back in the past, which in my case is a lot of past years, we've known that, you know, some people have said, you know, well, why do you pay so much more taxes in Ottawa than whatever? The tie into geography is critical. Okay, the extra cost that we have. You know, have we updated the analysis that we did as time have gone along, so we have an idea of, you know, it does cost us a lot more to plow roads in something that's 2,700 square kilometers with a tax base of only $1 million, and also with that tax base based on a significant part of PILs and not on corporate, you know, regular business contributions.
In fact, Mr. Mayor, the councillor brings up a very good point. We have commenced an analysis of what's happening to our service levels across the city, all the departments. And you're starting to see pressure now on the service levels because of the growth that's happening, the geography is affecting us, our ability to mine out efficiencies when we have to cover more square miles as the city grows makes it very difficult. Our senior leadership team has been addressing that problem. The budget target that's before you is in part to address some of that problem and to start to be able to prevent our services from starting to erode and decline, because I believe we're at that peak right now, at that tipping point, where many of our services are under pressure, and we've been mining out you know, efficiencies over the last number of years. And we've done some analysis to show the savings that staff undertake every year in preparation for the budget, so that we can create room for council to be able to prioritize where you want to spend. And you've seen that the last 2 years, where we found efficiencies through reorganization and other initiatives, and council was able to take that money. So the point being that when you start looking at your services and you start having that discussion, this budget and particularly the next one, you're going to be in a position where you're going to be making choices about where to invest the $34 million that's left for the city. Where do you want that invested? And we have a responsibility to be able to share with you what services are under pressure and which ones are starting to go on a downward trend versus being maintained based on the growth pressures.
So in Barrhaven, and because we're just coming off of an election, I can say that I've started the conversation with people on the quality of the service and the amount of the service and tying it into a different way of funding, and whether there is a willingness to consider having autonomy over things that we absolutely need and haven't been able to do because of no money. And so development charges, that bylaw this year is going to be very, very important and you know, everyone needs to understand that we're, whether it's affordable housing or whether it's roads or libraries, I mean, from soup to nuts, that's going to be a very important document for you all to participate in. But I am looking for a smorgasbord, if you will, Ms. Similik, of ways, alternate ways of funding, and seeing whether there's an appetite in communities. Because I'm not fixed on 3%. I'm going to support this today. But I think in some cases what I don't like is when we say, okay, we're going to be fair. We've got 34 million, so we're going to spread it across the city. Well, I have 90 million people in Barrhaven. I'm never going to get my share. I never have had my share. And that means Barrhaven doesn't get its share. So I would be looking for that. I'd be asking for those kinds of tools as well. Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor.
I don't think there are 9 million people in Barrhaven.
No, sorry, 90,000. It feels like 9 million, 90 million.
Okay, sometimes we all embellish a little bit, but that was off the Richter scale there. I was in Barrhaven last week. There are not 9 million people there.
Just feels like
Okay, thank you. Councillor Eglai, please.
Mr. Mayor, I think that's a projection for next year, the 9 million. Councillor Harder spoke about nimbleness, Mr. Kanellakis, and one of the things that I want to ask about and make sure that it's within your flexibility, if you will, as you build this budget is a number of us around the table, particularly my ward and Councillor El Chantiri's ward are still struggling with the after effects of the tornado. I know that senior management and the mayor's office are in discussions with various levels of government to see if they're going to provide more funding for things like woodlot restoration, removal of stumping, replanting, all those things. But we don't have positive answers yet on that. So my question to you is, are you building some flexibility into the budget that if the other levels of government come back to us and say, no, we're not going to give you any more money, that we still have flexibility in our city budget to respond to those very real needs that people have going into the next year?
Mr. Mayor, the review of the last major incident, the tornadoes, is underway. We are in the process of doing a review of the incident, receiving input from community associations and the councillors affected, staff input, and we're building that into a model of showing what areas we have to focus on in terms of any other future incident that comes forward. Mr. DeMonte is leading that with his team. We've just had an exercise on Friday where we tested our current model, and we acknowledge that, you know, there's some issues that probably will take some capital investment for us to be able to actually improve where we were. One of them was on our communications, our cell phone capabilities, and some of those other things. And of course, the recovery efforts and what do we need to do to expedite some of the recovery efforts while people are in between funding sources and all the other things that happen to them. So that is on our plate. We're looking at that. If that is where we come to a conclusion, and the councillors will be informed, of course, when we're doing that, that we will be making efforts to ensure that our budget reflects the capacity we need to be able to respond to those kinds of hazards.
And I appreciate that, but I'm also speaking about the hazard is gone now, and the problems are still there. So if you can make sure that council is informed prior to the budget deliberations whether or not federal or provincial funding is coming in, and if you'll take as direction what options staff has to deal with the issues of replanting, removing stump, all those sorts of things if the money isn't there. Is that a direction that you can accept, that you will have options for us if the federal and provincial money is not there?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
And I will write it out. I see the clerks. Please write it out, and I will write it out. The other question that I have for you is, we're being asked today to talk or to hone in on a 3% increase, and one of the pieces of that increase is a figure of, I think, $9.8 million to go towards infrastructure, which I think is great. It's what all of us heard, I think, during the campaign, was the roads and the park, play structures, and all those other things that need to have renewal. What I'm concerned about is the ability to make sure that money goes there, and I'll tell you why I'm a little concerned about it. Previous meeting, we approved a budget approach that says when you get to committee of the whole, you can take from different committees and different budgets and mix and match. So what I want to hear, or what I'm asking, I guess, is how do we know if we vote on this today and the path you're going, that we're still going to be on a sustainable path that and maintainable path that continues to give the $9.8 million and reduces our infrastructure gap to only 5 years? Or is that money also going to be open to being poached, so to speak, by other committees, by other concerns?
So the $9.8 million will be an increase to the contribution to capital, which forms part of the non-departmental budget, which is in front of FEDCO. It is therefore one of those items that there is an ability to be poached. But every time a councillor would come forward with they want to reduce the contribution to capital to fund something else, we would have to identify these are the capital projects that would be cancelled as a result of that. I think that's the thing that will keep diminishing those contributions in check, because it's not just a simple remove it, it's remove it, oh, and these projects now are no longer in the capital budget. So unfortunately, Council, I can't I can't assure you that it won't be poached. I would suggest it will be difficult to poach it, but there's no guarantee that it won't be.
So there's no tool in your toolbox that would shutter or shelter that $9.8 million to make sure that we're actually reducing our infrastructure gap by the 5 years.
It's funded from tax dollars, and all tax dollars are there for, they're interchangeable. So no, there's no, it's not a dedicated levy. It's just part of the citywide levy. So yes, I do not have any tools that could prevent it from being poached.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. And just to follow up, we had the discussion that I did raise the stump and woodlot issue that you and certainly Councillor El Shantir are familiar with respect to the tornado with the Premier. And their initial response, as you know, from the Minister was they didn't have that funding, but they said that they would take a second look at it, perhaps from another ministry. So we'll certainly continue to put our point of view forward to both the provincial and federal governments who offered support, and we would like to take them up on that offer. So, Conseil Fleury, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire.
On the contrary, I'm very comfortable with having a certain target because we can work within a framework, and it provides a direction for our executive staff so that they can set a budget. My concern is more related to the alignment between the budget that we'll be approving today and our future direction, because we do have certain priorities. We've seen that, for example, with the investment that we made in roads. So it puts us on a certain path in terms of those priorities. So I have two questions. Last year, we were surprised by the surplus that we had at the end of the year. Where are we now? And were the things that were submitted, I'm talking about the percentages and the expenditures, does it reflect our present situation or the end of the year situation?
We get
Okay. Oui, quand on...
Yes. When we set the 3%, we estimated this year's expenses, and when we look at the next year's budget, we base it on what happened this year and what we expect to happen next year. So could you clarify? Do we think that we might be in a situation that will be a surplus situation at the end of 2018? It's a surplus, and what is the amount? We don't have a final amount yet, but it's not insignificant. Could you clarify a little bit more?
Probably around 5 million. Well, it all depends on what happens with the rest of winter, but about 5 million on the tax side, and I think a little bit more on the rate-supported side.
And you're using that amount in the budget directions?
No, what we're doing is it'll be included in the budget. You will see what we're forecasting for all of the various departments and areas for their 2018 final numbers, and it'll be pretty close to final as part of the budget, so you'll be able to see where the surpluses and the deficits are. But as Ms. Jasmine said, we look at the results of any preceding year, and we adjust. If there is a surplus in an area, we will most likely say it was from revenue. We'll adjust that and bring that into the 2019 budget. So you will actually have more or less the 2018 final numbers built into the 2019 budget, whereas before, what you had last year is you had an estimate of what it was going to be done in September. So by the time we got to November or December, when we actually adopted it, things had changed significantly. But you will have almost a 100% accurate picture of what 2018 is ending at.
Okay. And for the public and maybe new members of council, we're approving a budget after January 1st. Can you maybe speak to that just for public record? How are you making sure that there's no funding gap or issues for programs early in the year?
So because we have an election every 4 years now, we have actually in our bylaws, we have constraints on what the spending can be. So for all departments by March 31st, they can only have spent 25% of their budget, with the exception of basically winter maintenance, because that is, we don't want to curtail their activities, and the emergency areas. But everybody else is more or less, they can't go ahead and start spending as if the budget was in place. They can just continue on with operations, and then once the budget is improved, they can enact all of those additional operations that are approved as part of the budget.
Merci. Monsieur Manconi, vous avez parlé.
Mr. Manconi, you talked earlier about the budget items. Could you clarify? We are in a complete transition year with the light rail project, and we'll see where it leads us for discussions with OC Transpo. We really feel some pressure because we need additional services in the new areas of the city, and also pressure for existing roads, which might have some capacity issues. So I know you're in transition, and we'll talk about the priorities for council. What can we tell our communities in terms of that dynamic? Mr. Mayor, you can tell the community that in 2019, when we start operating light rail, some things will change. And the outcome of the investment is that there will be more reliability on the transit, and the millions more investment will provide more capability to adjust roads that have a problem. When light rail starts, there will be more reliability for all the cities, so there'll be many changes within the city. There'll be a shakeout, and then in 2020 we can do something else. But it's a good year for investing in public transit because there'll be light rail, $2 million, and $5 million in investments. After all the comments that you gave to our team.
In question, and maybe this is for the clerk. I've spoken in the election. We used to have a term of council priority, and that will be a discussion in the new year relating to capital housing investments. Just procedurally, if I were, and I've spoken about this, we'll see as part of the budget where I land on the conversation and with colleagues' feedback as well. But if I were to bring forward a motion relating to a tax levy for housing specifically, as I talked about in the past, procedurally, would it have to go through committee? Could I bring it as council of the whole? So I just want to understand, as part of these budget directions, what levers we're continuing to keep, or what does that mean for in terms of procedure?
Mr. Mayor, there's no prohibition on a member of council waiting until, quite frankly, you're in committee of the whole dealing with the budget to move a motion with regards to your operating or capital budget.
Okay.
Hey, anything else, Councillor?
Just finalement.
Finally, I realize.
I assume and I believe, just from seeing a lot of our platforms, that transit, roads, and housing will be dominant in the conversations. I think the mayor and the administration see that. I'm very concerned around our building capacity for housing and how we're going to do that. So I'll certainly be interested, as part of this year's budget, seeing how we've seen Ford Avenue, we're seeing ongoing pressures relating to the waiting list. So what flexibility are we going to put in to enable new housing opportunities, from supplements, rent gear to income, rent subs, new housing? So, I'm not seeing it in the budget direction, but certainly it'll be part of the important conversations on CPS for this year's budget, in my mind.
Okay, thank you. And just to remind members of council, you can also bring forward ideas for things we shouldn't be funding anymore. Because there's two sides, of course, to a ledger. So I've heard lots of ideas on how to spend more money, but I think we also have a collective responsibility to ask our constituents, and I'm sure we heard many ideas on how to save money. That's another way of dealing with some of the pressures that we have to face. We should consider those options as well. Councillor Deans, please.
Well, what a lovely segue into what I wanted to say. No, it really was. Because 3% sounds like a lot of money, but then when you start thinking about building a city, a safe, healthy city for everyone, and all of the competing priorities, it actually isn't a lot of money for all the things that we want to accomplish here. And so in my time on council over the years, one of the things that we've done periodically are program reviews, universal program reviews, and other reviews that will seek to ferret out efficiencies. In an organization of this size and this complexity, there are always things that we're doing that we don't need to keep doing. And I think that part of the budget exercise has to be identifying those, because we can all identify areas where we want to spend more, but we need to have a process to find the things that perhaps we don't need to be spending those areas anymore or as much money anymore, so that we can be efficient. My impression from the tax base is they understand the complexity of running a city, and they understand that it costs money. And they're willing to pay as long as they get value for money for the tax dollars that they spend. But they want to see an effort for efficiency. So what is the process to find the efficiencies in the city's budget?
Mr. Mayor, I guess I go far back enough to amalgamation with all the efficiency and program review, and there were a few councillors that are here today that were there then. We basically started in 2001 finding efficiencies. I can report that we have documented, and I anticipated this question coming up, since 2001, the city and council collectively have found $361 million in permanent net savings to the city budget, and we've reduced 1,658 full-time equivalents to date. That's the kind of savings we bring every year. Part of it was with the universal program review. Part of it was direction that council gave us. They gave us efficiency targets that we built into the budget. Part of it was a Service Ottawa program where council invested $80 million and asked us to find $40 million in efficiencies through technology upgrades. Every year we have submissions from our departments that surpass anything that's reasonable in terms of a tax increase, because staff submit it. The treasurer, the department heads, the general managers here, myself, we review those. We basically look at where the risks are, where were there surpluses the year before, where can we allocate budgets within budgets to make the thing balance, where do we find opportunities to take some risk on some budgets, where are there opportunities to save money. We currently have a number of efficiency reviews happening in almost every department. The general manager has taken a lead to look at various branches, to look at how much more we can mine out savings, and that's happening. That happens as part of the discipline of having a budget direction that council gives us. When you give us a budget direction, we try to stay within that, and it forces the administration to start looking. I'm reluctant to start a program review, sort of the kind of thing that reminds you of maybe this universal program review or something that large corporately, because I believe we have to get past the provincial budget in the spring to see what the impact is, which then positions where council wants to focus its efforts in terms of what the impacts are to the various services before we start taking money out of. In other words, shoot ourselves twice. Let's see what happens, and then look forward to see where we're at. Because the benefit of an election year is you do have two budgets in 1 year, and you're going to see a very clear picture of your financial situation sort of out to 2021, which you normally wouldn't see. So I want to assure council that we are constantly looking for money because we've had to stay within the cap. We found a lot of money over the last 18 years, and that never stops. We've got reviews right now. Some of them we haven't shared because there's collective agreement issues and stuff, but that work is constantly underway and is what contributes, and what you'll see when you see the draft budget, those inputs and those assumptions are built into that budget.
Okay, thank you for that answer. And if it were possible for you to, in the context of the budget, provide sort of an assessment of each department. You said each department was looking for efficiencies. If you could enunciate for us where those are so that we understand them as part of the budget process, I think that would be helpful. I know everyone has ideas about important spending. I mean, my feeling is that along with the infrastructure that we obviously need to focus on, there's another piece, and that's social infrastructure. And it's I want to make sure that you're thinking about that when you're building the budget, especially when it comes to youth and barrier-free programs, because it's all part of providing a safer community. And so now that I'm in this new role, I want to make sure that we are finding a way to get money in the hands of important organizations that are doing that work in the community and doing it very well. I did want to talk about the police services budget just briefly. I see that there's a recommendation for 3%. I understand that there is negotiations with upper tier governments currently ongoing. You know, I think the mayor's goal and my goal is to get more resources into our police service. Councillor Brockington and Cloutier and I and Mayor Watson all attended a meeting in the South End last week. There were between 250 and 300 people there, and they're very concerned about the street violence escalation in this community. And so am I, and I think we all are. And so I want to make sure that our ultimate goal, that the police service has the resources they need to keep us safe, is reflected in our budget. So to that end, I do have a budget direction. So I'd like to direct the city manager to meet in advance of tabling of the 29 draft budget at the Ottawa Police Service Board with the chair of the PSB, City of Ottawa finance staff, the chief of police, to discuss their specific budget pressures to get a better understanding of any potential demonstrated needs for their budget beyond the 3% directed by council. It should be clear that the intent of this discussion is to get a clear understanding of the police budget to ensure these pressures are communicated to all levels of government. I think you clearly understand my goal in doing that. I want to make sure that we are properly resourced moving forward so that we can ensure the protection of this city. So that's my direction. Thank you very much.
Great, and I forgot to mention, Councillor, that Minister MacLeod also called to confirm that the money will be coming, so that's good assurance on both the part of the Premier and the Minister. And I think, you know, the Councillor brought up a good point in terms of where do we find these savings. It's a massive organization, and it's, you know, I think often I have people come up to me or email me with an idea. Sometimes they're really good ideas, and other times they just probably would not make the savings that we'd anticipated. But two good examples, I think, were when we got out of the golf course business, Pineview, which, you know, often lost money, that's off the books. And then I couldn't believe we actually had, you know, 24 horses on the payroll because we own the equestrian park. That's off the books. It's doing very, very well. We sold the horses, and it's not a core service to the business that we're in to be providing, you know, polo ponies and horse stabling at a subsidized rent when there's plenty of options in the farming community for bedding of horses. So I think if members during the course of the election came across people with ideas, or they saw, you know, what they thought was waste, go to see City Manager Kanellakis, because often there's a, you know, a good reason why something may look wasteful, or there's no reason, and it should be addressed. I've been hounding the city manager. You know, we got to do a much more aggressive job of getting rid of surplus buildings and property. You know, I think where was it in one councillor's ward? There's this building that's been sitting there vacant for years, and I don't know why we just don't sell the building. So I think we have to look at those kinds of things as cost savings, because it does two things. One, it gets the dollars into the capital budget for the sale of the property or the building that's no longer in use. But secondly, we then start generating tax revenue because we're not paying taxes when it's a city building. So it's a double loss for us if we don't move at a faster pace. So I appreciate the work that the staff have done on that. Councillor Menard, please, on the report.
Thanks, Mayor. I just have a couple of questions and then I have some directions. My first question is around the long-range financial plan. I understand this was approved not too long ago at the end of 2017. Is it anticipated that Council would approve another long-range financial plan this term?
We update the long-range financial plans on a regular basis. I believe the next one you'll probably be seeing is when we do stage 2 of light rail, which is in early 2019. And then we will update most likely the tax-supported one after that, just to give you an idea of where we're going or how we've progressed with the infrastructure gap and rate. If there's a significant change in something, for example, development charges might be an issue for the rate side, we would update the long-range financial plan after that.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Another question I have is around, at the school board, we'd have similar to what you've done on Folio 7 of the report, which is great. And then when the budget was tabled, we'd have detailed breakdowns of where those additional revenues would go. So if they were for maintenance of a road, we'd see that specifically. Obviously at the school board, it would be different than that. But is that something that you do here on the budget? You have show detailed where the new revenues, so the tax supported and the assessment growth, where those are going in the budget, or is do councillors have to sort of go through the budget, sift through it, and pick those out?
We don't assign the growth or the tax revenue to that this dollar increase goes here. What you see is the change in the budgets overall. So you'll see, for example, a department goes from $1 million to $1.10 million, and that 10 will be funded from the increase in the taxation.
Okay, so just on that same page, the 9.8 million that's going to be going to infrastructure renewal. We won't necessarily see where exactly that's gone. And then the $35 million to fund increases in compensation, materials, growth in services stemming from the addition of new assets. Those won't be broken down any further. Okay, so I have, instead of that motion, I have a direction. Is it, I'm not sure, Mayor, if you want me to read the direction now, if that would be in order?
Yes, please.
Okay, so it's that staff be directed to prepare the following alternative fare increase scenarios to be provided to Council as a public supplemental to the 2019 budget report, including the anticipated impact of these scenarios on city revenue, the transit levy, service levels, and ridership. Number 1, a budget scenario addendum where all transit fares are frozen for the 2019 budget year. And number 2, a scenario addendum where the Equipass, UPass, Community Pass, and Access Pass fares are frozen for the 2019 budget year.
Okay, so we'll hold the directions to staff to see if there's consensus. Councillor Blais, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I have a question related to the recommendation to increase the transit levy above the rate at which we're proposing to increase fares. Council's policy is to get to a 55-45% split ratio on fares to taxes, which we're not there yet. And this seems to be sending it in the opposite direction of what the policy indicates. And so I'm wondering how this can be the recommendation of staff to go against our policy direction.
Thank you for the question. So you're correct. This does actually move your RC revenue cost ratio away from the target as opposed towards it. 2019 is a bit of an anomaly, though, in that we're doing the transition to light rail. When you move to light rail, what is actually going to happen is your RC ratio is going to increase without you doing anything. And that's because you're basically moving what are now operating costs to capital costs. And the RC ratio, the base of it is over operating costs. So the operating costs will reduce, the revenue, fare revenue will remain constant, and as a result, the RC ratio will move towards the target. So 2019, yes, we know we're not going quite in direction with policy, but we know we're getting there eventually. And unfortunately, because of the fact that we have a mid-year, or because it's an election year and we're only able to do the increase in July, that's impacting what we're presenting here.
Well, thank you very much for that. I think, Mr. Mayor, by and large, these are very good recommendations overall, obviously subject to the specifics that you and the team will put together and present to Council in the new year. My caution, friends, would be to not have the cap, I think is, or at least a target, I think is dangerous. I think in all budgeting we do, whether it's at home or a business we may have operated or in a previous employment, there have always been caps. At home, you have a cap. If I show up at home with a set of keys to a new Ferrari, my wife will go crazy because that's not in our budget. That's not part of our cap. I want a house in Barbados, but that's not part of what we can afford right now. And so allowing everyone to put all the candy into the jar without telling anyone how big the jar is not a really effective way for us to budget, and it's not a really fair way either to set expectations and give staff a job to do. We all want more things. I want more things in Cumberland. I want more things in Ottawa. I want more things in my personal life. We can't afford all the things we want. So we need to prioritize, and we need to set some parameters for that prioritization, and that's what the cap and the target allows us to do. And so I'd encourage everyone to vote against any notion of taking this this cap out of the recommendation. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brockington, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I won't repeat what Councillor Dean said. I appreciate a lot of what she said, talking about efficiencies, and City Manager and I have met a number of occasions this calendar year to talk specifically about that, the budget, which is very important, not just to my residents, but all ratepayers. It's certainly much more challenging to build an extensive process which reviews and analyzes and questions expenditures and the need to increase in expenses, because a lot of the times it's very easy to raise taxes. It's easy to raise taxes, vote, decide on amount, and to build a process that is extensive and continuously reviews and puts staff's feet to the fire about questioning their expenses is very needed. And I appreciate the context that the City Manager provided today, because they are doing very good work. As he said, since amalgamation, $361 million in savings over the last decade and a half, and I think Councillor Dean's asked for this to be in the budget documents, but I think we need to share that with our residents as well. That it's not just a debate about what the tax levies and rates should be, but there's ongoing hard work going on in this organization over time that looks for those efficiencies. So if that context and a very brief history can be provided in the more fulsome budget documents, I think that would be great, because it provides the context that we need when we're talking with our residents and our business owners. It's not just about rate increases, but also how the city is doing the work with efficiencies, I think would be very, very helpful. I'm not sure what conversations has happened, and I'm not looking for detail today, but Mr. City Manager, in item 1, it talks about the proposed up to increases for police, library, and public health. Have the police chief, have the library CEO, and has the chief medical officer of health been consulted on these numbers?
I haven't. I've spoken to the police chief. The medical officer of health also spoke to her, and our chief librarian, or our CEO of our library. They're aware of what this direction is. They have a process, obviously, with their board, Mr. Mayor. The chief effectively is saying that he has to respect his board and bring his estimates to the board and to the new chair and the new board members, and that's where the discussion happens around around their budget. And so he's not going to be commenting as an example in terms of where he thinks his budget's going to be at this time. He understands he's going to receive a direction from council that will be the framework of what they're going to be looking at, but that doesn't preclude obviously the board from reviewing all their things. And now we have a direction from the chair of the board or the future chair of the board that we will be meeting with the treasurer to look at their expenses and see what we can put forward to other levels of government. So I look forward to that meeting, and I hope that's part of the process of, keeping everybody, as the previous councillor spoke, keeping that discipline on everybody in terms of looking hard at your expenses, looking hard at what you do, and making sure that you do your best to bring in a responsible budget. Otherwise, I think every general manager here at the table would love to have an open-ended direction, because our staff are very good at wanting more, like everybody does. They want to do better, they want to provide better service, but there has to be some discipline that's applied to everybody that makes them think hard and think twice about what they're doing and make them pick priorities.
Thank you. And my gut says that library and health will probably be able to live within the means of no more than a 3% increase. But we as a council are going to have some very serious budget discussions very soon about the Police Services Board budget. And if you're not on the board, I certainly invite you to come to not just their committee meetings, but their discussions as well when they meet. I don't expect staff to know this now, but I would like to ask this question. The 3% levy, up to 3%, 3.5% levy for the transit levy and a 2.5% fare increase on an annual basis, what will the average ratepayer who takes the bus annually, has a pass, what's that impact on them? So not just a fare increase, but a 3.5% levy increase. If I could just table that question, I don't expect the answer today. Finally, I guess my final comment is I support what's before us, colleagues. I do believe that it is wise to provide our staff with direction to proceed with the budget and present that budget to us in a few months' time. Yes, we've gone through extensive discussions with our residents this past election. There will be opportunities for, once the budget has been tabled, to consult on that budget and to see whether the needs of your wards in this city are reflected in that budget. And then there'll be a process to address that through the committee and committee the whole process. So I think it's important to provide that direction. I'm underline the word by no more than 3%. This is not an automatic 3% increase. And again, it's to staff to ensure that where the pressures exist, that they can go up to that limit in their preliminary budget, but I do not expect to see every single line in the budget get across the board 3%. That should not how it is. And so I just underline the words by no more, because that provides me with some comfort. There will be extensive debate and discussion when the budget comes out, but I'm satisfied with what's before us today. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Dudas, please.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we're speaking about caps, but just as a point of clarification, and I'm reading this in the report, and maybe I just want to throw this out there. This is for 2019 budget. We will have opportunities going forward to look at further discussion around this. That's one question. And then my other question was, in terms of the infrastructure gap, when we're looking at the 10 years to close that gap, are we basing the 10 years on 2%?
First of all, yes, this is only for 2019, and so there will be another directions report coming forward for 2021, 22. So this is just a one-year direction, recognizing that we are not aware of the impact of what the provincial budget will bring in either March or April. With respect to the closing of the infrastructure gap, we had come forward recommending that we would do it over 10 years' time, and that was it was unclear as to whether that was going to be in addition to 2% or part of 2%. It had been part of the 2% before, which is why City Manager Kanellakis is saying that the service levels have been decreasing, because we were using the room in the 2% to basically fix something that has been a historical problem since amalgamation, that we do not have the right amount being contributed towards the capital assets that we have in the city. So what we're recommending now is we're carving it out. It's part of the 3%. It's almost a full 1% of the 3% on the citywide. So effectively, we're giving 2% to the city and 1% for the capital levy on the citywide basis.
Okay, and just on the point that this, so I agree with much of what I'm hearing here in that, you know, I'm focused on the no more than 3%, because I think that, you know, we have a due diligence to the taxpayer, to our constituents, to make sure that we're spending their dollars wisely. And, you know, on the campaign trail, we've had the largest public consultation for the city by having an election and being on the campaign. And what I heard at the door was that people, yes, they recognize that there's a need to invest in our infrastructure. There's a need to invest in our transit. There's a need to invest in the services they receive. They also want to live in an affordable city, and they want predictability to be around that, because they need to be able to budget and anticipate. So while I'm not particularly in favor of a 3%, and I would look forward to working with Marianne and Isabel and city staff in the next couple of weeks to see if there's ways that I can bring forward measures to offset that increase, I do want to make sure that we do have a predictable element to our budget, so that when we go back to our taxpayers, when we go back to our constituents, we can allow them with the opportunity to know what to expect. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Councillor Dudas. Councillor McKenney, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do also, I am struggling with the budget directions because, you know, in the past, I did support it. And then was told that, you know, I had agreed to a cap. And I think this whole, you know, is it a target, is it a cap, is a conversation that, you know, at least we're having here today that we, you know, didn't have in the last term. But you know, we have to ensure that the city is affordable. There's no doubt, but you know, it has to be affordable for everyone. And you know, I think that there are ways of moving the yardstick forward on ensuring that the folks who are being left behind, and they are being left behind, that we can move that yardstick. And it doesn't always mean a huge infusion of tax dollars, but you know, when we look at housing, for example, maybe I'll put the question to Ms. Burrell. How much does it cost to keep a family for 1 month in a motel?
So the family motel rate is about $100 a day.
Okay. So, you know, and then we've got shelters. And what's the per diem for a single person, say, in a shelter?
Mr. Mayor, the per diem for a single person in a shelter is $44 a day.
So what's the monthly pressure for all of our shelter beds? Not motels right now, but shelter beds. And what's our monthly pressure for motels? Do you approximate?
I'd have to go back, Mr. Mayor, and check the numbers on the pressure. I think that it's clear that there's been an increase this year, that we've had to accommodate more individuals and therefore relying on more off-site in terms of motels. But the exact number, I would have to come back to council.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I actually, it would be good to have that number ahead of when we actually go into budget. But you know, have we, and I understand that that housing for shelters is flowed through the city from the province, so we don't have great discretion with how we spend that money. But have we ever asked the province? Have we ever pointed out, especially the government we have now is, often looking for efficiencies as well. That money being turned into capital dollars to actually build affordable housing. We've got, on average, I think it's about 183 families every night in this city living in motels. Think about that. Their kids have to get up and go to school. There's no kitchen. There's no real place to do homework. It's not, it's temporary. It's not secure. They're not making friends. They're not doing well in school. We closed down Forward Family Shelter. 18 families had to be moved out, and we've closed that shelter, one of only 2 family shelters. And when that happened, I can tell you that the shelters who deal with women and children fleeing abuse came to me almost immediately, because that was their overflow. That was part of their overflow. And we are hearing stories, and right now it's a bit anecdotal, but we are getting stories of women and children fleeing abuse, not having anywhere. At one time, the city would house them, would put them in a motel. That's not necessarily the case anymore. They're going back. They're sleeping on people's couches. Rooming houses are, the ones that aren't operating well. People are paying $600, $700, $800, $900 a month for a room filled with cockroaches. I could share an email that I got with you just yesterday of somebody who cannot stay in a room because it's so full of cockroaches. So when we talk about affordability, I haven't seen the term housing in this report. I know we haven't done our term of council priorities, but I don't see the word housing in this report. And those are the pressures that are out there. That is what people are dealing with. It's not about whether we're going to buy Ferraris or a home in Barbados. It's about whether we can house families, women and children fleeing abuse, families who are living in motels, people who are living in rooming houses full of bugs and paying $600, $700, $800, $900 a month. That is not affordable. That is leaving people behind in our city. So tax versus cap, I'm not sure that I can support a budget direction that gives me a hard cap, that I cannot ensure that those residents that I represent, that we all represent, aren't going to be taken care of.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hubley, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. My question's for Mr. Manconi, so I'm hoping he's making his way back to his seat.
So, Mr. Manconi, John Manconi, you've got a question. Just while we're waiting, I forgot to mention in my comments, Councillor Hubley and Tierney were very helpful when the asset report came out, and it showed that we'd be a 10-year time frame to get to the backlog. It went to 5 years. So I just wanted to give credit to Councillors Hubley and Tierney for the work they did on that report with Alain Gauthier and others.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'd like to, on that note, I'd like to congratulate staff for coming back with a way to do that without increasing debt. I think that was very important, and so well done. Mr. Manconi, on the motion to take out the wording on growth, money going to growth in the transit. You said you think you can manage that within that envelope. So I know Councillor Harder asked you a lot of questions, but just want to be very clear for the residents in the burbs that you're saying that's enough money to address the concerns that we have for the fixes in the current system for the burbs, because for my council colleagues, for example, if there's an issue with a route in my area, that impacts Councillor Chiarelli. We've had to work on a few. Councillor Leeper talked about one example where if we don't put the investment into the growth, it impacts all the other wards as well. So could you answer that, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. So what we did, first and foremost, it'd never be enough to fix everything, but I don't think that's what you're asking. What I tasked Mr. Scrimgeour with this $5 million investment, using the council policy on what routes to address that need addressing, where would you invest it? So that first $2.5 million would go to all the feedback that every single councillor in the previous council gave us on the post-LRT bus routes, and we're now briefing the new councillors, getting their input on that, and the remaining $2.5 million would be invested on those areas that have chronic problems, which includes some of the growth areas. So it would be spread across those, but it will not fix every single issue that's out there. And back to Councillor Flitty's comments earlier on, remembering that when we open the LRT, there'll be a stabilization of all those interline routes, so reliability should increase citywide, particularly out in the suburban areas where those buses don't need to deadhead into the core. So it's a blend of all those things and doing the best on what I describe as a very complicated year.
Okay, thank you. And my other question is on the direction to draw up some scenarios of what it would be like to freeze the rate increases for a year or 2 years. Could that report back to council also include what the impacts will be to fund that, like how much service cuts there will have to be, or how much additional cost would have to go on to the tax bill of every resident?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor, happy to do the work. It's not complicated work to do. I just want to make sure that council is aware that, you know, we will need an offset in the order of about $2.3 million. This is half a year. It's 4.7 annualized. And without any direction, I don't want to surprise council. What I'll do is I'll come back with that $5 million and reduce it by $2.3 million. The Treasurer and I have spoken, and that's the first tranche that we would take, or if you want to give me further direction to cut existing routes, your three levers are taxes, fares, or routes, or service, and so it's about $2.3 million of something that would need to come off the list in order for us to meet the mandate or change the mandate with that, within that context.
Thank you, Mr. Manconi. And now for Mr. Mayor, if I could, I'd like to also say something about the 3% cap. This, up until this year, as we both and a number of our colleagues all got elected in 2010. I was quite proud of the fact that we were able to come forward with, in the first term, a steady plan of 2.5%. I think Mr. Kanellakis can confirm that that really makes the running of the city a lot easier when they know what the increases are over a multi-year period. They can plan for that. They can try to get all our wants and needs included in that amount. Last term, we did very well by getting to drop that to 2. So I'm very reluctant to see that go up. However, in discussions with you, and from what we heard on the campaign trail, I'm sure I got the same message as a lot of my colleagues. They want to see the money go into the roads and fix the roads. Whether they drive a car or ride the bus, they're feeling, or ride a bike, they're feeling the impacts of the reduction in infrastructure spending when the federal government cut it at their share, and then the province followed suit. So I will support the 3% cap. I will not support a blank check on the tax increases because of the impacts on residents in my ward and others. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Tierney, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of quick questions around process, and it's great our Eastern Bloc colleagues have already got their physical face-to-face meetings all aligned. We're ready to go already, right out of the gate, so we're proud of that. But when it comes to a lot of the online offerings that we've had, so for example, the Citizen Budget tool we've used for the last 3 years, it gives us a lot of very valuable feedback because our residents get to play like they're a councillor and dictate what they would like to see increased or decreased, and that information is extremely valuable. Are we using that tool again this year?
Okay. Unfortunately, we are not using the tool this year. It's actually a fairly expensive tool to use. And when we looked at the participation rate in the first year was fairly good. We had hoped that the participation rate would have increased in the second year, and it didn't. It actually decreased rather significantly. So we didn't think it was worth the investment. There are multiple tools available right now on the website, and we are putting an online survey tool that will be available in January.
Well, and you know, that's unfortunate. When you say expensive, what values are we talking for a tool that, and let's face it, I haven't been to a bank teller in years. There's no milkman anymore. People like that ability to be able to contribute and provide their feedback online. And not just by email, actually real world examples using their tax information that they use for their home municipal taxes and determine what the increase would look like. I thought that was extremely valuable. So what are we going to do to accommodate that? And again, what was the cost?
So the cost was $20,000. So in terms of the number of responses was just a few hundreds. So just judging the cost versus the benefit, it just didn't seem worth that.
Knowing that we're in a very condensed cycle, and since the budget cycle has changed for this specific period because of the election, is this something that we can look at reviewing for the second budget that will be coming up towards the end of this year, reviewing to see if we can, maybe it's an education element, maybe it's something that councillors can help push out, but I got a lot of great feedback from a lot of people in my community. I got a lot of great responses, especially the second year, and I'd like to see that back. $20,000 in a consultation process, I don't know if that's the end of the world. I think the information we garner back from it's extremely important. There's a lot of people that are, whether they're shut-ins, they can't get out, they want to provide that specific information that you can't get in an email. Do we have the opportunity to discuss that before the next budget cycle comes out?
Yeah, suggestions absolutely can be made, and we could look at other options to collect information. We're going to try the online survey this year and see how many responses we get through that. So we'll continue to explore different options, absolutely, and looking for feedback.
Okay, I'll be making a big press on that. I'm kind of set back. I wasn't aware that we had lost that tool. I thought it was a great tool. Second, we also made a big push last year, and Mr. Manconi, we've talked about this, and I just want to ensure we're on track. We heard it at the door several times about roads, and I think a big part of the toolbox we need as councillors is that new, first time ever, we're going to have online, where people can look at all the roads online. There was a commitment that we'd have that before this budget cycle to be able to see what those life cycles are, and not just us councillors, which we don't have access to right now, by the way, warning. New councillors, it's painful to be able to find out what roads need life cycle maintenance. But in the new world, the public will see along with us which roads are due for life cycle when the last time they were done. Are we still going to have that at the beginning of this cycle?
Mr. Mayor, it's actually our department that's responsible for the online tool. And it's in beta testing right now. We're just testing the efficacy of the actual public's able to interact with it. But the data is actually all compiled. And I'll, Mr. Mayor, with your consent, I'll generate a memo to council on the status of that project.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Tierney. Councillor Cavanaugh, please.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to talk about how we look at this in terms of a budget. I'm coming from the school board as well, and we handled almost $1 billion in a budget, and we had to make cuts, and we had to do things that were tough decisions. So I get that. I understand that. But the bottom line was, the ultimate goal was investing. Well, at the school board, that's an obvious one. You're investing in education. You're investing in making kids better and having great graduates. We look at investments here too, and one of the concerns I have is the way things are siloed. We're talking about transit in a separate silo from transportation. And we don't look at, in terms of, the investment we're making is actually saving money. So, for example, the LRT is very clear. We made a big lump investment because we clearly saw that this is going to be a long-term effect. I'm wondering if there's any way to show that, because, we're talking about something that's eventually going to reduce costs on buses and road maintenance, et cetera. The other one that was brought up by Councillor McKenney is just the investments in shelters versus putting people up in motels. Do we have a mechanism to show that we're actually going to save money and just make people's lives a lot better and just be decent people when we make the proper investments in things, when we invest in in having green spaces, we're going to see, more results. When we invest in things that prevent crime, i.e. invest in programs that might be useful to youth, I think we get a little carried away about the numbers, but not seeing how those numbers are working, because we're a bit siloed. And I'm wondering if there's any cross-reference on these spendings, because I'm seeing some concerns in terms of that we're just talking about that number without looking at the overall effect. Is there some way of showing that we're actually saving money for the future in the overall? Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, there's two parts to that answer. The first part on the transportation and transit, that is under the scope of one departmental mandate under Mr. Manconi, which is Transportation Services Department. He has both those mandates, and he works very closely with Mr. Willis on our planning and infrastructure. So that discussion is happening, and it's coming to a focal point in the Transportation Master Plan, which is going to be arriving, at least the first tweaking of it, probably in February of 2019. And then we'll undertake a full Transportation Master Plan, which will be the focal point of discussion of where Council wants to put its priorities with respect to pedestrian, cycling, transit, and vehicles. So that is coming to you, and you'll have your opportunity there. The second thing that I want to, and maybe I wasn't so clear about it, is on the city strategic plan, which will be council priorities. That process is going to begin in the spring, probably around April, and run right into probably November of next year, with discussion with councillors, the public at committee, and your opportunity to look at outcomes, because I think that's what Mr. Mayor and the council are speaking about, what outcomes we want for this city, and having that discussion around how you measure those things, what things we want to track, where do you want to put your investments to get the best outcomes based on what you think are important. That will be a process that you'll be undertaking over a 6-month period. We are now pulling that together based on all the foresight sessions we've had and all the information we have. We've gathered a lot of material that from council and from our work and thought leaders internationally, quite frankly. And we want to bring that back to council to give you an opportunity to discuss where do you actually want to be investing your money as you go forward. So you will have opportunity in both transportation, which is a subset of the strategic priority and the strategic plan, but you'll also have a specific opportunity to do transportation as part of the Transportation Master Plan.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor, anything else to the city manager?
I'm done.
Councillor Cavanaugh?
No, that's fine. Thank you. I think we have a lot of work to do in just terms of showing that there is cost savings in these investments, and it's not just that's part of the package. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Sides, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I'd like to recognize that since being elected, I have a whole new appreciation of what goes into this budget process and the incredibly talented people that keep us informed, that answer our questions. So a big thank you for that. And a thank you to my colleagues as well. I've really enjoyed this discussion and the great questions that have been raised. To me, I wanted to just make a few points, and that is to share, and I'm sure many of my colleagues experienced the same during the last few months in our campaign as it pertains to the budget. And that's that residents are demanding value. First and foremost, it is value that matters when we have these discussions and we put together this budget, meaning getting the basics right, delivering the best possible services that we can with tax dollars. The second message that was clear to me throughout my campaign was the concerns around affordability. And I share those concerns. Of course, we want to make sure no one is left behind, and many within our community that are also on fixed incomes. I know that Ottawa is not necessarily the cheapest place in our country to live. If we look at the inflation year over year, I know as recently as this fall, we were looking at just over 3%, which is above the national average. So when we discuss today the report and the budget directives of 3%, as well as the transit levy of 3.5% increase, I think given the current economic climate, I believe this could be well received, but only when we focus on value. And so I support the report and these directives, but as we go through this process, my focus and what I'll be watching and hoping to contribute to is ensuring that we get the best possible value through this process. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor Sides. Councillor Nussbaum, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I see I'm the last speaker, so I'll be very brief. I see a real value in having a tax target. I think it's important that we give staff the direction they need to establish a budget that is in the ballpark of where we hope to end up. And while it's true there was some confusion about whether a target is a cap, the city clerk was actually very, very helpful to us in the last term of council. He provided clarity on that point, and the answer was it's very clearly a target. So I'll just read to you the response to an inquiry that I put to him in 2016, sorry. While council has established specific constraints for the review of the budgets at the relevant commission, as we did last week, it is the opinion of the city clerk and solicitor that there are no procedural or legal constraints preventing council and committee of the whole from approving changes to the draft budget which would result in an increase or decrease to the tax rate above whatever the target is. It was 2% last time, it's 3% for us. So that actually gives me a lot of comfort. If circumstances change or something happens in the deliberation and a majority of council determine that they'd like to spend less or more than the tax target, then the city clerk has made it clear that council has that ability. So that reassurance gives me comfort that asking staff to build a draft budget at a particular target is both useful and does not tie our hands at committee of the whole at council if there are reasons to veer from that. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Does anyone else wish to speak on any of the motions, directions, or the item before us? So we've got a couple of, one motion here from Councillor Brockington and Blais with respect to the transit levy. So I think Councillor, you were getting a coffee when I think Mr. Manconi explained what was happening with those funds. So on that motion, carried. The next is a direction to staff, Councillor Menard. I'm going to not support this and ask for yeas and nays. You know, folks, nothing is free in this world. This is the direction to staff by Councillor Menard to study the transit fares are frozen for the 2019 year, and a scenario addendum whereby the Equipass, UPass, and Community Pass and Access Pass fares are frozen for 2019. So we've been told by, I think Councillor Hubley asked the question, what would be the revenue loss for the city? And just to repeat it, I believe, Mr. Manconi, it's 4.7 million for a year and obviously 9.4 million for 2 years. And we have to find that money somewhere. And it would have to come from the transit budget. And I was told, Mr. Manconi, the options are basically cuts to service, because that's really the only thing you can cut, or personnel, I suppose, which would be a cut to service. Is that correct?
You could reduce the services, or you could go after the $5 million piece, which addresses a lot of the chronic issues system-wide.
So for my colleagues from the suburbs that have had enormous pressure with the lack of bus service, this motion would in essence we'd have to find that $4.7 million, and the only new revenue really above and beyond the inflationary increase is that $5 million as a result of going to the 3.5% transit levy. So, you know, the reality is, unless you're prepared to give staff some direction on where to find the money, I don't think we can in good conscience go and tell people we're going to freeze your fares. We've done it because of the LRT delay for 6 months, which I think is reasonable, but to extend it another 6 months and then potentially another year is not responsible because we don't have a source of revenue in order to pay for it. So on the Menard amendment, Councillor Menard.
Point. So there we go. I guess just not touch it. So I'd actually like to withdraw the direction to staff.
Okay. All right, that's withdrawn. Thank you. Next is Councillor Dean's direction with respect to the police budget. Agreed. Councillor Egly's direction to staff with respect to the tornado. Agreed. Agreed. Councillor Leeper wanted a separate. Were you just going to dissent on number 1, Councillor?
I'm looking for you. If you separate out the votes, I'm just looking for yeas and nays.
Okay, so I think you're only separating 1, so we'll have a yeas and nay on 1, and then we can vote on the rest. Okay, so this is yeas and nays have been called. This is item 1 on page 15, and this is setting the cap at no more than 3% for 2019. So I'd encourage members of council to support this. We need to give direction to staff. Otherwise, as I think the city manager said very clearly, every member of that senior management team, if we asked, would you like more money than you're getting, they'd put their hand up. Of course they would. Who wouldn't? But I think we also have to have some degree of control and restraint to ensure that the public have some predictability when it comes to their tax bill. You know, I met in the campaign a lot of seniors who I call their house rich and cash poor, because they've been living in this house for 20, 30, 50 years, and it's gone up in value. Market value assessment, as we all know, is another factor we have no control over. And they're moving out of their home, not for health reasons, but because they can't afford the property taxes. They're mortgage free, but they have a big house. They may be a widower or a widower. And I think we need to ensure that the public understand that we're doing our best to control our spending so we can control their taxes, number 1. And secondly, that at the end of the day, the staff needs some guidelines. Otherwise, it's a complete blue sky where everyone throws everything in. Then we have to go through this terrible exercise where we start cutting to bring it down to a reasonable level. So, you know, I would strongly encourage those members of council to support item number 1 by voting yes, to at least give our staff some direction. I can't think of any organization whose board of directors, and that's what we are, would not set parameters for the CEO and the senior management for their budget, whether it's a multinational corporation, a community association. You have to understand how much money is coming in before you can spend it. So it's a pretty simple concept, and I'm hoping that most members of council will support it. So yeas and nays on number 1, please. No, we've just been asked for number 1 to separate, and then we'll vote on the rest of our recommendations.
Conseil Blais. Councillor DeRose.
Yes.
Councillor Leeper.
No.
Councillor Hubley.
Yes.
Councillor Moffat.
Yes.
Conseil Fleury.
Oui.
Councillor McKenney.
No.
Councillor Nussbaum.
Yes.
Councillor Dudas.
Yes.
Councillor Luloff.
Yes.
Councillor Gower.
Yes.
Councillor Meehan.
Yes.
Councillor Tierney.
Yes.
Councillor Deans.
Yes.
Councillor Kavanagh.
No.
Councillor El-Shantiri.
Yes.
Councillor Sudds.
Yes.
Councillor Menard.
No.
Councillor Shirelli.
Yes.
Councillor Harder.
Yes.
Councillor Cloutier.
Oui.
Councillor Brockington.
Yes.
Councillor Egli.
Yes.
Mayor Watson.
Yes.
20 yeas, 4 nays.
So the next items are items 2 to 6. Carried? Carried. And that's carried as amended by the Brockington motion. City Clerk and Solicitor, Greffier Municipal et Avocat Général, summary of oral and written public submissions for items related to the Planning Act explanation requirements at the City Council meeting of November 28th. And the report recommendation is before you. Carried. Item number 8, the tentative collective agreement with Amalgamated Transit Union Local 1760, ATU 1760, in camera, reporting out date upon ratification by Council of the agreements. Does anyone wish to go in camera on this item? So motion to ratify the agreements to be moved in open session. So Councillor Blais, seconded by Councillor Hubley. If you would like to, since we're not going in camera, just for new members of council, this is pretty common when we have a collective agreement. Most of the time, unless there's a dispute between the union and ourselves, or the staff have to get a mandate back above and beyond what we settled in camera the first time, we normally don't go in camera to discuss it unless there's a problem, and it appears there's been a satisfactory conclusion of these negotiations, and Councillor Blais will introduce the motion, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. That the rules of procedure be suspended to consider the following motion in order to ratify the collective agreements which have already been ratified by the union membership.
On suspension, carried.
Whereas the City of Ottawa, the City and the Amalgamated Transit Union Local 1760, ATU 1760, have committed to working collaboratively to resolve issues of mutual concern in the workplace, and whereas the collective agreements between the City and ATU 1760 expired on December 31st, 2017, and whereas the bargaining teams for the City and ATU 1760 have been in negotiations in an effort to conclude a renewal of the collective agreements on a mutually agreeable terms, and whereas the City and ATU 1670 bargaining teams concluded tentative agreements on November 17, 2018, subject to ratification by ATU 1760 membership and City Council, and whereas ATU 1760 membership has ratified the tentative agreements, and whereas the tentative agreements are affordable and fair to taxpayers and our employees, therefore be resolved that the City ratify the tentative agreements reached with ATU Local 1760, and that the terms of the tentative agreement be made public. And I think in that fourth whereas from the bottom, it should be 1760 and not 1670.
Okay, on the motion, carried. Adopté, merci. Motion to adopt reports, motion portant adoption de rapport. Conseiller Blais, s'il vous plaît, appuyé par Conseiller Nussbaum.
Seconded by Councillor Nussbaum.
That nominating committee report 1, the report from corporate services departments entitled Proposed 2019 Budget Directions, Timeline and Consultation Process, and the report from the City Clerk and Solicitor entitled Summary of Oral and Written Public Submissions for items subject to the Planning Act explanation requirements at the City Council meeting of November 28, 2018 be received and adopted as amended.
Carried. Motions of which notice have been previously given. Motion dont avait été donnée entièrement. Councillor Moffat, seconded by myself. Councillor, if you would introduce the motion, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a motion, I mentioned it briefly last week. There's a trust fund that was set up after the passing of Mrs. Georgina Falls, and the trust fund is built so that the interest built on it can actually be paid back into anything for Centennial Park in Mantic. She actually set up a similar one for the library in Mantic. So there's a community organization in Mantic that's looking to renew Centennial Park, specifically the portion that features the outdoor rink, the basketball court, and the skate park. We're working on a plan to do that. They're going to submit a major capital building grant application for that. But in the meantime, they want to create a concept plan for the park. They have some money that they've applied for elsewhere, and then they want to match it through the Georgina Falls Trust Fund. So therefore be resolved that $5,500 be transferred from the Georgina Falls Trust Fund for the purposes of developing a concept plan for Centennial Park in Manotick. Oh, sorry. It's actually directly to, it's supposed to say, pardon me, be transferred to the Manotick Culture Parks and Recreation Association. Thanks.
Motion carried, adopté, merci. The next motion which we were given notice of is by Conseiller Fleury, appuyé par Conseiller Nussbaum. Councillor Fleury, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. On a eu...
Thank you. We've had the opportunity to introduce this last week, and we have the support of the administration. So if you have any questions, I can answer.
Not use the tax stabilization fund for these kinds of purposes. I know it's a relatively small amount, but I'd encourage members of council to work with staff. I know there were lots of meetings back and forth, and there's some issues with people's driveways and so on, but I don't think it was the intended purpose of the stabilization fund to use this, but given the amount, and we're in winter season now, I think it's reasonable. So on the motion, carried. Motions requiring suspension of the rules of procedure. Is there any motion that would require suspension of the rules? No. Notice is a motion for consideration at a subsequent meeting. We have Councillor Cloutier, seconded by Councillor Harder. Councillor Cloutier.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Simply putting a notice of motion for consideration by Council in January, and thank you for Councillor Harder for her input in this and her support in this. Just asking Canada Lands Corporation and the Government of Canada on two important parcels of land within the ward that I represent, Alta Vista, the former Federal Studies Centre, and 530 Tremblay Road, for substantive and good engagement with the community, and asking the mayor to write to our local representatives to convey council's request on this matter. I look forward to discussing it in January.
Okay, we'll have that discussion at our next meeting. Thank you, Councillor, for that. Another notice of motion by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Eglai, please.
Thank you very much. I will, since it's going to be floating out there for over a month, I will read the entire motion just to make sure the context is there. So whereas the terms of reference for the Environment and Climate Protection Committee states that its responsibilities include providing guidance and direction on all issues relating to environmental services, community sustainability, stormwater management, solid waste management, utilities, water and wastewater, water pollution control, urban forestry and open spaces. And whereas climate protection was a 2014-2018 term of council priority, and its broad mandate had implications for more than just one committee. And whereas the committee's name does not reference the specific responsibilities in the terms of reference regarding water and wastewater, as well as solid waste, therefore be it resolved that the Environment and Climate Protection Committee be renamed the Standing Committee on Water, Waste, and Environmental Protection. And be it further resolved that a climate impact lens be considered for the template for all Standing Committee reports, and that this be considered that this consideration be referred to the midterm governance review. Be it further resolved that a comprehensive review of all lenses be included in the midterm governance review, so as to ensure efficient and meaningful reporting to committees and council. I have discussed this with a number of individuals that are heavily involved with our mandate at the Environment Committee, and I will continue to do so between now and January. I want to make sure that it's something that is supportive and people understand what the purpose here is. Climate change, you'll see it at the top of we have this in our term of council priority, it's top of the house. And it belongs in every committee. So the lens is supposed to achieve that, and we'll talk more about that. I know College Ottawa is working with Stephen Willis on that, so we'll talk about that more going forward, and we can discuss this in January. Thank you.
Okay, excuse me. Thank you very much, Councillor. Are there any other notices of motion for consideration of subsequent meeting? No. Motion to introduce bylaws. Motion portant présentation de règlement. Councillor Blais et Conseiller Nussbaum, s'il vous plaît.
That the bylaws listed on the agenda under motion to introduce bylaws, 3 readings, be read and passed.
On the motion, carried. Confirmation bylaw, règlement de ratification. Conseiller Blais et Nussbaum, s'il vous plaît.
That the following bylaw be read and passed to confirm the proceedings of the council meeting of December 12, 2018.
On the motion, carried. Madam Deputy Clerk, are there any written inquiries? Adjournment, Councillor Blais and Nussbaum. Oh, sorry.
Thanks. On the inquiry, I have an inquiry from staff on the effect of city ridership by freezing fares for all of the 2019 budget year, and the effect on city ridership by freezing fares for the Equipass, UPass, Community Pass, and Access Pass only for the 2019 budget year.
Okay, I think you have all that information, Mr. Manconi, so it won't be a long report. Just to remind everyone, we have our special meeting tomorrow re-cannabis begins at 10 a.m. Thursday, December 13th. To date, we have 12 public delegations that have registered to speak as of Tuesday evening. And Councillor Blais, the adjournment motion, please.
Que les délibérations du Conseil du
That the proceedings of City Council meeting of December 12, 2018 be adjourned.
Thank you very much, and to all of our staff, I'm sure we'll see many of you, but Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, as this is our last council meeting, and the same to all.